Good morning, everyone. Lovely to be here with you today. My name is Rebecca Davis, senior journalist at the Daily Maverick. I may look reasonably professional on my top half, but I'm actually swaddled in a blanket in my lower half because it is freezing in Cape Town today. I hope you're all keeping warm wherever you are. Huge welcome to those of you joining us. It is a great pleasure to be here today with two of my favorite political voices, and that is my brilliant Daily Maverick colleague, Queenin Masuabi, and one of South Africa's leading academics, Professor William Gumede. Good morning to you both, and thanks so much for being here with us.
Hi, Bex. It's great to be here with you.
William, I'm going to start with you because you were, of course, also, in addition to your very extremely impressive academic work, you were also the chair of the Multi-Party Charter, which was the grouping of opposition parties committed to working together after the elections if they achieved a sufficient result to form a majority government. That, of course, was not the case ultimately. Now, in our webinar today, we are going to be focusing on the GNU cabinet, but just because, William, I haven't had a chance to chat to you since the elections, was the cumulative performance of the multi-party charter parties a disappointment to you?
No, thank you for having me. I'm always so exciting speaking to you. Let's just talk here now, the multi-party charter. I mean, the mandate of, for the multi-party charter really was to bring the ANC below 50%. Yeah, the ANC fell below to the floor of 40%. So really, in a way, that was sort of a partial success. Individually, the parties did not do as well as predicted. And I think that was a disappointment. But I think the bigger, for me, really the bigger success story really is in terms of the beginning of the realignment of our politics, which is not over. I mean, we need to realign our politics between constitutional parties and unconstitutional parties, violent parties, and so on. And that was the beginning. And also, I think also for the long term, it started to build a culture of opposition. How do you oppose an opposition cooperating? I mean, we're seeing it now with the EFF and MK. They have what they call the progressive alliances, a coalition grouping. So really the understanding, a new culture of, because so many opposition parties, so many parties, that small parties on their own first really should not be on their own. They should either collaborate or kind of merge with other parties. So and that's part of the future, the present and the future realignment. The last part of the success, I think, the government, MPCs and government. I mean, the DA, Inkatha Freedom Party, Freedom Front Plus, mid-day government is the government of national unity, and that is one of the objectives. Was that look. Prior to the elections, there was a discussion among the group. If things don't turn out the way as predicted, what would they do? And a government of national unity was one of those discussions. So we will have a part of the MPC is now co-governing, which in itself is a success.
That is true, I suppose. That is a very positive spin on it, I think, but I'll accept it. I'd like to encourage all of you watching to please pop your comments and questions in the chat. I think there are going to be a lot of questions. I mean, there's still a lot of uncertainty at the moment about what exactly is going on in our politics, and we'd love to get to as many of your questions as we can. So please do keep them coming. Queenin, there's been a lot of discussion about who came out on top when the GNU cabinet was announced. We had DA leader John Steenhuisen telling the country on Monday the DA drove a hard bargain. And we have others who feel that, as the youth would say, the DA was dribbled. What's your take on that? Who won ultimately, and does it matter?
I think, can I just say, as a patriotic South African, I'd say South Africans won, firstly, because we did form a government relatively faster than most countries in the same situation as us, who have had to go into coalitions at a national level. So that's a big win for us. The president mentioned it in his announcement speech. And also this was a conversation I had with John on Monday when I was interviewing him. So that's the first part. But when we talk about political parties, definitely the ANC won. I think the DA initially did want around 12 ministerial posts, and they were brought down significantly. And I believe that for the first time, we saw the DA really want to be a part of something, despite it being with the ANC. And I think the reason why that, they accepted the 6 posts and I think about 5 deputy minister posts is because at the end of the day, they had a mission to keep away the so-called doomsday coalition of the MK and EFF and ANC working together. So I think that the DA, although they bargained, they negotiated with everything they had, at the end of the day, they made a huge compromise. And that's to keep the Doomsday Coalition away and also to get an opportunity as a party to show their own talent and to see what they are worth as a political party, because such an opportunity doesn't come by easily. And if it is that they had walked away from the negotiations this time around, it could have had a negative impact. And at the end of the day, they wouldn't have any control over how cabinet is constituted. So I must give them some credit for making this huge compromise. But definitely, I think that the ANC is the biggest winner. At the end of the day, they decided which cabinet posts the other political parties would have. We know that, for instance, the PA wanted Home Affairs, but it was given to the DA instead. So a lot of the decisions were made by the president at the end of the day, the president being from the ANC. So I think the ANC actually gained a lot from this. And at the end of the day, South Africans have won.
I love that. William, do you think enough of an attempt was made to accommodate the smaller parties in this cabinet? I mean, it's really only the DA who's ended up with any significant share of the executive roles. Are there parties that you think should legitimately feel hard done by in the GNU?
Before I get to that, I just want to respond to one more thing about the MPC, and then I'm going to leave that for discussion. It was quite after the election results came out. It was a big decision among the group had to be made in terms of what to do next. They didn't get a majority. Some of the in the group, some of the parties did poorly. What to do now? And the ANC drops from what was to the 40% floor. It's quite important thing. I mean, that's different from just getting below 50%, which was, the initial idea. So a really, really big decision was made whether to partner with the ANC and the GNU or whether to go it alone. So Action SA at the end of the day was the only party that then decided, well, actually, they will stick to not partnering with the ANC, no matter whether it's a government of national unity. So that discussion, I mean, it hasn't come out in the public, but there's a very important discussion of contributing to a government if it is a special, if it's a grand coalition, a special way, if it is a government of national unity, not just a normal coalition. Now, let's look, I mean, to get back to the smaller parties now, from the modeling point of view of putting a government of national unity, I mean, the whole idea of a government of national unity is you bring as many political parties as possible together. So the diversity of political parties, and that is different from a normal coalition, because in a normal coalition you just need a majority, and that is and you keep it together. But in a government of national unity, you bring that diversity because you want to bring in resources, skill sets, new ideas, new energy. And also the idea of a government of national unity is the idea that that a country is in a crisis and a government is in a crisis, and that one party alone cannot deliver. And you need a national effort. So that's a key part of the difference between a government of national unity and an ordinary coalition. But it is, although you want to have as many parties as possible, it is also not very practical. I mean, to appoint everyone into cabinet positions. But there's other ways to accommodate parties. Some parties would be accommodated in the legislature, for example, chairing committees and so on. And there will be many other parties that still would not be able to be accommodated there. They'll be accommodated to be part of inquiries. The government has a lot of inquiries and so on. And even parties that may not have formal positions will be a part of the executive, part of the decision making. There's a council that's put together. I mean, I do believe when you're in a coalition with different parties, you put together structures, which is a political structure, a political council, where a lot of the problems are dealt with before it gets to cabinet. We did that the same as the MPC and so on. And it's quite important. So even if parties don't have formal positions, they'll be still part of their council in the GNU council.
Fair enough. William, you've spoken there about the need for a new skill set in the GNU. Queenin spoke earlier about this being a chance for the DA to showcase their talents. Let me ask you, William, are these cabinet picks the best and the brightest? And I mean that from the ANC and the DA.
Okay. I mean, first, to start off with, the ANC has been in power for 30 years, and often they've had the same people and recycled people. So many of the same people get reappointed and recycled and so on. But they haven't delivered. And that is why they got to the 40% floor. So one would have think from, even if you're an outsider, that the ANC would now appoint totally different people. Because, I mean, to reappoint the same people who didn't deliver the last 30 years, I mean, it doesn't make sense. It's not logical. It's not common sense. What the ANC has appeared to have done is to balance all of the interests in the party. I mean, you've got 34 deputy ministers, for example. I mean, clearly it's they wanted to accommodate as many ANC people in the cabinet. I mean, given the fact that the ANC lost a lot of MPs because they got 40%, and they didn't want to lose as many of the ministers and so on. So that was a key sort of thing. I mean, some of the people, like let's just say the Minister of Defense, which is a typical example, who was the Minister of Education, brought us 30% pass rate. Now, I mean, that is, suicide, educational suicide to introduce a 30% pass rate. I mean, in a world where the economy is they does well, they do it because they've got a competitive education system. Their kids can compete with the rest of the world. We've killed our competitiveness. I mean, it's just a whole generation just wiped out and so on. But their minister is not going to be in defense. Now, I mean, I fear for what's going to happen to defense. And there's such an opportunity in defense for imagination because, there's a world at war, and we can build a manufacturing sector. We always talk about manufacturing, but defense can, for example, with the imagination, with the innovation, can actually be a manufacturing, a global export manufacturing, another moment for it, and so on. But I fear with Minister Masuabi, who just came from with basic education, did a terrible job. We're not going to get that out here. So that's the one thing. From the opposition side, I think there's an opportunity for people who've never been as national government to bring the energy and bring new ideas and new resources and so on. And that's going to be very, very important. I think after 5 years, we may see a phenomenon where the opposition part, they're not opposition parties anymore because let's call them partners. The partners, the non-ANC partners in the GNU are going to deliver better. And the ANC minister is going to deliver poorly because the same people. I mean, what they're going to do new, and we're going to have ANC ministers like a two-tier division. ANC ministers performing poorly, and the non-ANC ministers are going to do very well. I think because of the enthusiasm and the energy, and they want to make a difference. They want to serve the constituencies. They want to make a difference, and that's actually going to potentially be the outcome at the end of 5 years.
Yeah, that's a best case scenario, I think. I want to come back to the performance thing in a minute, but Queenin, just on the composition of the GNU, how much of a role did cronyism play in the cabinet picks? And again, I mean the DA and the ANC.
I think definitely on both sides, Biggs, you can see that it's all about alignment. In the ANC particularly, when people speak about Angie Motshekga, politically she is quite strong in the ANC. Angie Motshekga has been very instrumental in the women who are elected in the ANC's top 7 throughout. She is the woman behind the campaign for Gwen Ramakgopa to be the treasurer of the ANC. She's the one who's been advocating for President Cyril Ramaphosa and was instrumental in his second term. When you look at other members who have been appointed, you also need to consider which provinces they're from. For instance, we see Stan Matapata getting the deputy position in cabinet, and it's simply because Limpopo did so well for the ANC in the election. I mean, without them, I think they could have even gotten lower than they achieved, which is just 40%. You look at people from the Eastern Cape who are like Stella Ndabeni Abrams and Gweda Mantashe, who have also been again announced to be part of cabinet. Those are instrumental members in the ANC because the Eastern Cape also makes up a huge chunk of the party's membership and is also still one of the provinces where the ANC managed to get a majority. So those kind of elements really do matter when it comes to, appointment in the ANC sphere. And with the DA, what I can tell you, I definitely saw is some of John's very closest allies. Dean McPherson being one of them. From Mpumalanga, the chairperson there, Jane Sitole, she's now the Deputy Minister of Small Business. She's backed John for 2 terms now. They have a very close relationship politically. And that's how you see how leaders are prioritizing. Sorry about that. So that's how you see how leaders are prioritizing those who have backed them politically. And now they are being rewarded for this kind of loyalty. You also look at people like Soli Malatsi, who is the spokesperson of the DA, and he is known to be aligned to the Helen Zille faction in the party. So Helen obviously wields a lot of power in the DA. So she also has people who have been given the opportunity to be part of the national executive. So it plays a huge role because at the end of the day, everything starts with the party, and leaders will prioritize those who are loyal to them.
Ashwell Sarapan, of course, as well, made a deputy minister. Helen Zille's protege is her former campaign manager. I mean, I must say, I find it slightly depressing that at the DA's first taste of power, they have effectively proceeded along very similar lines to the ANC. It's undeniable that Steenhuisen's 2 best friends in the ANC have been, in the DA have been made ministers, Dean McPherson and Leon Schreiber. And there are legitimate questions, I think, to be asked about whether McPherson, in particular, as somebody with just a matric, is the most qualified person for that role. But that's perhaps a conversation we can continue in a while. For now, William, a number of cabinet roles have been divided up, right? Agriculture and land reform, for instance, now split, energy, mineral resources. In your view, is there any reasonable justification for this beyond simply the need to accommodate other parties in the executive?
But I think the only reason really why the splits happen is patronage, giving ANC patronage, and secondly to bring in new partners. I mean, the records around the world is not that great in terms of. I mean, a larger cabinet normally since the Second World War. If you look at the records, I mean, I was part of Ramaphosa's inquiry at the professionalization of the state, and I'm looking around the world. In developing countries and African countries with big, very, very big cabinets, they're normally ineffective, chaotic, and wasteful. I mean, it's just, and if you look at all of the countries since the Second World War, the big economic miracle countries that really moved from dire poverty or civil war or war and became developed countries, whether it's Poland from communism or Japan after the devastation of the war, South Korea after the Korean War. I mean, they all had small cabinets. And when I say small cabinets, we're talking about between 8 members in a cabinet. And max, I mean, Poland, certainly among that group, the biggest cabinet, 25, 26 during their big growth here. So the smaller the cabinets, essentially the bigger. And you look at a big cabinets around the world, of developing countries, those countries that failed the most. You can actually just draw a graph and look like the bigger the cabinet, the more failure. So there really is going to be a challenge to turn around this big unwieldy cabinet into something effective, given the fact that comparatively around the world, big cabinets generally fail.
Can I just say something? Can I just add something about the cabinet itself? Also, there are a lot of constituencies that the president had to please in the process of, appointing members of cabinet. And when you look at even the bloating of it, it's the 2 deputy ministers, I feel, is completely unnecessary. I mean, we've been having conversations about how deputy ministers are just, ceremonial at some point, and they're not needed in cabinet at all. But here we are having 2 deputy ministers. And when you look at it, it's because the president had to fulfill a mandate for each constituency in the ANC, which is also young people. So when you look at the ministries with 2 deputies, sometimes you'll notice that these are members under 34 years old from the ANC who are also going to be a part of this. So, this whole issue about pleasing constituencies is also a big factor in why we have such a bloated cabinet.
That we are paying for. We're seeing all your questions come in. Please keep them streaming, and we're going to smash them in the second half of the webinar. Queenin, let's talk a bit about what's happening currently in Gauteng. First of all, can you give us a sense of where we are in those negotiations? And secondly, to what degree are the provincial co-governance arrangements linked to the national executive? In other words, if the ANC and the DA can't reach a deal in Gauteng, does that have knock-on effects for the rest of the country?
So last week I wrote a story about how the ANC and DA were having conversations potentially of allowing the GNU agreement to trickle down to local government, right? So this is quite important in provinces where no one managed to get a majority. And, if they're having talks to this extent about KZN and potentially the Eastern Cape, then Gauteng also needs to come in because that's where there are a lot of hung councils, and Gauteng as a province itself is hung. The issue here is that, there's been negotiations between the DA and ANC. You've seen how it's played out in the media, in the briefings where, the ANC has accused the DA of behaving like spoiled brats, and the DA is saying that they won't allow the ANC to give them minimal positions when it comes to Gauteng. So there's been a spat in that regard. But generally, the sense from me is that the ANC in Gauteng wants to work with the EFF and the MK party. That has been clear since last week, as I've been speaking to people and doing my research, realizing that they are comfortable with their position with the EFF and MK, and that they've been working with the EFF already in Ekurhuleni and in the city of Joburg, and they want to continue that relationship, despite the national leadership having told them that at some point they will have to sever ties with the EFF. So they're in a very tight position. I know that there is a press briefing at 2, and the ANC Secretary General Fikile Mbalula will be running that briefing, which is quite interesting. It means that probably national leadership is putting their foot down on a way forward. And whether it will have any detriment to the national agreement, I mean, potentially it could cause tension in that regard. But, they could maybe come to a conclusion that Gauteng would be the exception where they don't need to work together. I wonder how that would work out then, because, it seems like they're already solid in the other provinces. It would really complicate the view, because John Steenhuisen on Monday, when I spoke to him, was very clear that, one of their plans as the GNU is to stabilize local government. And by doing so, they're going to need to work together in all spheres of government. So it's going to be a tricky one for both parties. And I think at the end of the day, it's quite clear, just like the national negotiations, the DA wasn't able to walk out as easily. And I can see this happening also in Gauteng, because they've been negotiating for weeks and not walking out of this. And again, I think it is about not allowing the EFF and MK to be in governance.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, clearly quite a lot still up in the air. William, you're one of the few people in this country, I think, who has closely studied sort of the nuts and bolts of coalition arrangements in other countries. So let me ask you this. How should the DA operate going forward? And by that, I mean not their cabinet ministers, their ordinary MPs. Should they still feel free to criticize? I mean, I ask this because there's been a virtual silence from the DA machinery since the elections. There's a sense, that they don't want to do anything to upset the GNU arrangement, which is perfectly fine. But are they still going to be free to criticize ANC policy, particularly when it is so opposed to the DA's own in a number of cases? I've been talking to some DA MPs, and there really seems to be quite a lot of confusion about what their roles are now.
No, absolutely. I mean, I want to respond on the appointments of the DA to the cabinet just very, very quickly. I think it would have been lovely if the DA could have brought into kind of the front bench in cabinets most people from the colour community, because that's a really core constituency of the DA. I mean, it's carrying the DA and so on, and that is also going to be the challenge for the future of the DA from the Patriotic Alliance, the Cape Congress, Colour Congress Party, and so on. So maybe that was a missed opportunity. And even for the Indian community, I mean, there is, on the deputy minister side, but maybe a little bit more on the front, minister position, and maybe reverse some of the appointments made him deputy, and maybe just change optics, because optics is very important in politics. So that was a missed opportunity. I also thought a missed opportunity with potential to have Helen Zille in cabinet, possibly maybe on leading a tricky portfolio like that, and so on, just bring that kind of tough energy into cabinet. I mean, that for me would be from the missed opportunities. Now, just in terms of on the role inside and outside, I mean, that's going to be, they'll have to navigate that. Obviously, IFB also, and the DA, how they're going to navigate being inside, and then what do the MPs do? The first thing is, when you government of national unity, you are not the parties, DA and IFB, they are not part of the ANC. They are independent parties in a coalition, so their voice will be heard independently, and that's the exciting part. And that is also what it's all about. So for the first time, I think, even from Ramaphosa, how he going to manage this, because the DA cabinet ministers or IFB cabinet ministers are not ANC members. They still have their views, their party views, and they will have to give it, they have to give it to the ANC within that discussion. Now, up to now, the ANC has been leading cabinets where everyone thinks alike and everyone follows the line. So there's not going to be a thinking alike and following the line. So there's going to be that internal robust debate inside. And then there's going to be what to do outside. And I know this period, because this is an uncertain period, this is getting the GNU together. So that's why we've seen this kind of silence. But I think after that, how they're going to engage in Parliament, if you're a member of the DA or the IFP in Parliament now, what would it be what does it mean to be constructive to the GNU? So that's going to be important. And that is why the political council, the council that they've created, is going to be quite key, because they still have to be critical of their partners in the government of national unity. So how they're going to get that balance is going to be absolutely a challenge. And then the opposition parties, like say Action SA, that was part of the MPC that dropped out because they didn't want to partner with the ANC, they're now going to be in opposition. How are they going to play opposition? And I think this opposition with MK and EFF is very likely going to be the toughest opposition that we've experienced up to now. And so on. So the opposition to the GNU is going to be a tough one, and so on, because there's going to be a lot of opportunities for both MK, for MK, EFF, but also by Action SA. There's outside that if the GNU fails now, I mean, they'll be ready to govern potentially in 2029. So, I mean, the opportunity is there, and so on. So I think all of these challenges will have to be worked out still. I mean, this is uncharted territory. We haven't been here before, and it is going to be almost on a day-to-day basis. It's going to be worked out.
Queenin, what are you hearing from within the ANC about party sentiment regarding the GNU cabinet? We saw the leaking of WhatsApp messages from within the NEC suggesting significant differences of opinion on collaborating with the DA at all. Is the kind of fractiousness within the party about this likely to endanger the stability of the GNU, in your opinion?
Not at all. I do think that there's always been a lobby against working with the DA from day one because of policy differences, basically. And the ANC, obviously passing legislation like the NHI that the DA was vehemently against, saying that it needs to be adjusted and reviewed before it is, signed over as legislation. So that has always been a bone of contention in the ANC, where some believe that the DA is not the right choice. EFF is more aligned to the ANC. They have similar policies. They are basically one of the breakaway parties from the ANC, which only makes sense because they have history with the party and similar policy. So that has always been there. The constitution of this new GNU cabinet obviously will come with a lot of backlash and turmoil. But largely, the issue here is that the ANC has, to a large extent, managed to keep the DA away from what people say are key portfolios, right? I think one of the most key portfolios that they did receive is the infrastructure portfolio that's going to be led by Dean McPherson. And still, there is a deputy in the department from the ANC, which is Sihle Zilalala. So I think that's a good balance there. The lobby against working with the DA has never been strong enough because how things work in the ANC's National Executive Committee is that everything is done via voting and through democracy, internal democracy, and they did not win the argument around working with the DA. So it's going to be very hard to win any arguments moving ahead unless they're able to, convince one another and get a stronger lobby within the party. But for now, I think that the stronger lobby is for the GNU.
William, one wants to be positive. I think we all should be positive and optimistic as much as is kind of realistically possible. But how much practical scope will DA ministers have for meaningful reform? And I'm thinking specifically perhaps of the Basic Education Minister, Siviwe Garube. Honestly, my heart goes out to her because of the uphill battle she's going to face against the South African Democratic Teachers Union, SADTU, which has already, and in advance of the announcement, said it would declare war effectively against the DA minister. How will someone like Siviwe cope in that position?
I am actually quite optimistic. I think the government of national unity is not perfect, but it really is the best what we could have hoped for at this moment for the country. I mean, imagine having an ANC 50 plus or and so on, and then we would have had the same cabinet that was there before and everything, and so on. I mean, that really for the country, I think would have been a really terrible worst case scenario, possibly even a worse case scenario than having an ANC, EFF, MK, and so on. Because governments only deliver if they're humbled, if they know they're going to be out of power. So this is actually the only moment for South Africa that we're going to see deliver genuine attempts to deliver. Because if you have these sort of big majorities, what's the point of, why do you need to deliver? Because people are going to vote for you all the time. I mean, there's no incentive to deliver if people vote based on a past or based because, on the color and those kind of stuff. Now, whatever it mean if you now, if you a DA or IFP or Freedom Front Plus minister, I think the way our government is structured or has been operating, ministers actually have quite a lot of discretionary power. So you could focus on the job and actually sow delivery. I mean, basic education is a tough one because the unions have taken control of education, like the unions, for example, take control of energy or in mining and so on. So that's going to be a really tough one. But it is going to be important that ministers in that sort of very difficult spaces that they really drive. I mean, that they drive with steel the reforms, because at the end of the day is to deliver for South Africa. The unions want to deliver for themselves. I mean, sadly, that's why we have the failure of our education system. So there's going to be battles, and it's going to be baptism of fire. But it is, I mean, if they keep in their headspace that is in the public interest, is in the interest of South Africa, and so on, that's going to be absolutely the most important. So, I mean, up to now, the ANC has been unwilling to take on these vested interests, because the vested interest is part of the ANC's electoral system and package, and that is why we don't have delivery. We don't have delivery in ESCOM because the National Union of Mine Workers is a constituent of the ANC. The National Union of Mine Workers won't allow any person to be hired at ESCOM who's a member of the party. There's no political will to do something about it, and that's why we're not going to get delivery and so on. So the nice thing about now, the non-ANC parties, they can actually deal with that vested interest. So there's going to be a lot of screaming, there's going to be a lot of protests, and so on. But that is the nature of politics. If you want to have a reform, you have to be really, really steadfast and tackle the vested interest head on.
Yeah. Actually, my colleague Tim Cohen made an interesting suggestion yesterday that maybe the Ramaphosa's decision to give basic education to the DA was precisely because the ANC is fed up of SADTU, that they simply have recognized that they cannot deal with that union. Queenin, we've got a number of questions coming in about deputy ministers, a role which has kind of varying degrees of power. When I spoke to Peter Groenewald, who was previously a deputy minister, he said that, Peter Mulder, he said that it depends kind of on how much power the minister is willing to give you. But what we're seeing in the new cabinet is ANC and DA pairings in minister and deputy roles in a number of portfolios. How well do you think those pairings are going to work?
It's going to be so complicated, especially in instances where those who used to be ministers are now deputies. That's going to be very interesting to watch. I think generally getting new political principles in departments where it is predominantly people who are used to working with ANC leaders is going to be complicated as a whole, because everyone comes in with the new system of doing things. So it's going to be quite interesting to watch. I do know that ideally the ANC does not want any major changes to DGs in government departments. They want the new ministers to continue with their DGs, but that's yet to be seen. But I think both ANC and DA and the other parties like the PA and IFP and Freedom Fund Plus will be forced to really find a bridge with one another when it comes to working in these departments. I do know that, as you said, the role of the deputy minister is really determined by the minister. For instance, in Treasury, I do know that Enoch Godongwana and Minister Masondo, Deputy Minister Masondo, have really had a cohesive relationship. Masondo has represented South Africa so many times. They clearly do have a good trust relationship, and I really hope that we're able to see this replicated even in the case where the deputy and the minister are not from the same political party. But it's going to be an uphill battle, Bex. I don't think it's going to be an easy one at all.
No, for sure.
And Rebecca, just a response to that, because, deputy ministers, just understand, they're not part of the executive. It's the minister. So, that's how the system works. They just, and so on. So their power is entirely dependent on the minister. It's a little bit different for the Treasury because, the Treasury is constitutional. There's a constitutional entrenchment of the Treasury. It's the only department that's constitutionally entrenched. And so it gives this different power. So there, the deputy ministers actually play quite a bigger role and has a potential bigger role than any of the others. Because often deputy ministers are also head even of state-owned entities, PIC and so on. And that actually is the only place where the deputy minister actually has a fundamentally stronger potential role. In other departments, it's all up to the minister.
Yeah. William, a number of people are asking this. Let me just give you one of the questions. It's about policy. Here's Frano Rakshasa, really interested in William's thoughts on how policy will be implemented in each department, considering the differences in views. I think this is a really vital question. How will that work?
Yeah. No, the way policy works, so the big policies, they'll have to agree on the big policies, 5 or 6 sort of a GNU agreement and then on the budget. And then thereafter, the ministers of departments will implement it the way they think is suited. Yeah. And I know a lot of people say, well, isn't there ideological differences in policies? I have a different take on it. Is there are countries in such a crisis that almost to talk about policies is a bit of a luxury now, because it's almost like we have to fill potholes now. We can rail back to work. I mean, like it's going to be 5 years of basics, but the basics will also give us the growth, and so on. So without changing the policies of just getting back to normal will give us, I think, even a 5-6% growth if we could get that right. So no super new policies, but it's going to be important, and so on. I mean, there's going to be maybe in a foreign policy side where there's going to be difference in that GNU, I can see. But again, I don't think actually those differences need to be as different as it's. Let's just say on the Gaza conflict. I mean, it's what it would mean in a GNU that the policies will be a little bit more balanced, rather not extreme. I mean, a lot of the ANC policies have been policies of extreme, either black or either white. Now, I think the exciting opportunity with the GNU to bring it a little bit more to the middle, and so on. And that's actually maybe better for South Africa in everything, every policy, to have a middle policy rather than extreme policy.
I hope the same for our political discourse. Yeah. Sorry, Queenin.
Yeah, yes, I do hope the same. But, also what could be concerning or what could be a worry for the political parties is just their constituencies, only something to consider, once you've offered your voters one thing and then now you all kind of moving to the middle, a compromise that they didn't really vote for. So I'm already thinking ahead, and I'm thinking that the next election is going to be very interesting because of the compromises that we're going to see in the next couple of years because of the GNU government.
Yeah, and of course, as William was saying, there's every possibility that it is MK and the EFF who could be the major beneficiaries of the next election. Queenin, one for you from Saskia Falcon. How likely is it that all the political parties in the GNU are on the same page about its success? Do you think they all want it to work? Is there any chance of sort of internal sabotage?
I don't want to be this person, but maybe those who no longer occupy the positions they used to might feel like they don't want it to succeed. I don't want to be this person, but we need to consider that there are people who are better. There are those who didn't make it. I mean, even from the other parties. In the DA, I heard about some internal strife over who actually got the cabinet positions, the deputy positions as well. You can't tell me that there are other people, everyone is happy. There are people who wanted to also be in cabinet who are not. So we need to also consider that. But generally, those who have made it into cabinet or who are deputy ministers, they do definitely want to see things succeeding. They want to make change. And also remember, it's also about their own political self-interest. It's also to show that my political party, in our tenure, in our time in governance, we could do A, B, and C. And the DA is known to brag about the Western Cape every minute they get. They're always talking about what they've done in the Western Cape, in Cape Town. So I don't see them passing up the opportunity to say, when we were in charge of these ministries, this is what we've done so far. They love taking up stock. And I think that other political parties want to succeed as well, because they also want to say, in the last year, this is what we've done. They want to take up stock and they want to brag about their successes. So I think when it comes to this newly elected cabinet, there is a bit of optimism and a sense that they want to succeed. But outside, those who are not a part of this could feel otherwise.
Something interesting.
I want to agree with you just on that. I mean, this is the first time that there's a real incentive for people to deliver. I mean, the last time we had this kind of incentive was in 1994 with the Nelson Mandela government, because people wanted to do that. Thereafter, the ANC became very jaded because it just got majorities, no incentive. to deliver. So I think the individual parties, that energy of delivering, I fear for the ANC really from a different angle, is that the fight back against the will happen in the ANC. Those who oppose a government of national unity that includes the DA and the IFP, I mean, the events have moved too fast for many of them to respond. Although in Gauteng, this is the first of the big responses, because clearly, the Gauteng ANC group, I mean, they really don't want to have the DA and the IFP in any kind of coalition, and they're fighting it. It's almost like an indirect fight, proxy fight that they're having. And that's the first of the proxy fights. But I think in the medium term, we will be, the forces against DA, IFP, inclusion in GNU inside ANC will pick up very soon. And it's going to be a big battle for the ANC to contain, that kind of opposition. So people are going to try to make life difficult for the GNU, whether directly or indirectly, and so on. And that's going to, I think, the fight more concentrated within the ANC.
William, do we know yet what kind of conflict or deadlock breaking mechanisms the GNU players will be able to draw on?
I mean, the only one so far is, there are two. The one conflict one is that the 60%, if there's a conflict that they cannot deal with, or rather decision that there's a logjam around, that 60% of the parties, the decision made by 60% will carry. So that's the one. And then there's obviously the pre-conflict is the sort of the council where they will agree on things. I would love them to have actually a conflict resolution, independent conflict resolution mechanism, or ombudsman, or anything. I mean, with the MPC, what I had suggested, the group, if they would come to power and sort of things that they've agreed on, to have an independent conflict mechanism already from day one. So, I mean, it'd be very useful for this group now actually to have something like that, where they don't need to go to a 60% vote type of thing, where there is actually where you can have somebody else who can veto or make decisions who are not part of the cabinet or a member of any of the political parties, something like that, to experiment and see if something like that could work. But the parties will then have to agree that they will abide by an outcome.
Queenin, something interesting happened yesterday. We were sort of discussing it within our work team, which is that the new Minister of Public Works, Dean McPherson, sent out a very strongly worded, robust statement announcing that there would be no further use of new ministerial properties for ministers. He said that no applications will be entertained for new properties for ministers or deputy ministers. Very well and good. And then about, I don't know, a few hours later, a second statement came out from that same ministry saying, we retract that statement. What do you think that tells us about the kind of dynamics behind the scenes at the moment?
I think I think obviously the DA is gonna really come in hot, very excited, very willing to turn the situation around, but they will quickly learn about the bureaucracy of it all. And I think that was the case yesterday. I was actually extremely surprised that there would be a statement like this so soon. I mean, there was an announcement on Sunday, and then by Tuesday already, Dean is making such bold statements. So maybe that's his first lesson, that there's a bureaucracy behind everything, and that as much as he is the minister, there will be a lot of consultations and a lot of work to be done behind the scenes in terms of communicating such matters. Perhaps something that he should have taken to cabinet first, maybe for their first cabinet meeting, a suggestion that he could have tabled. But I think already it was the first lesson for the DA to say, yes, we see you are very optimistic and keen to start your work, but there are processes that need to be followed. I'm not 100%. I'm not 100% sure if in this instance it is that he had to consult anyone, but there are channels within government that you need to go through. It says a lot about what's happening behind the scenes, and key learning, I guess.
Yeah, I thought it was super interesting as well. I mean, maybe wait till you're sworn in, Minister.
Yes,
William, William, I want to give you enough time to answer this properly. Your advice, basically, for the players in the GNU, for the members of the executive, it's such a delicate time. What should they be focused on? What should they bear in mind?
I mean, there are two. I mean, obviously, I have been giving advice and so on, and I've worked on two things. I mean, I worked on the GNU models, and we've actually been planning this before this GNU government as one of the options. So, you know, sort of the MPC group would be ready if it gets to that. I mean, one thing just in terms of maturity is going to be quite key. Because the way the model works, it's based on consensus decision making. So there's a difference between consensus decision making and majority decision making. So I mean, ANC has been used to majority decision making. It means like if there's a disagreement, the majority party's view carries. Now in consensus decision making, that's not the case. So in consensus decision making, everyone loses almost in order to get a center. Like no one wins everything, like everyone has to compromise, including the dominant party. So that's going to be key. Now, the thing about consensus, it demands much more mature leaders. Now we haven't had many. Sadly, our political leaders are not very mature. I mean, that's just what it is. So that's going to be that. But there's the opportunities actually with consensus. It can actually both maturity. It can both maturity. So that's really going to be important. The second one is, I mean, I really have to get this conflict issue right. There's going to be conflicts, all relationships have conflicts, whether it's intimate, business, politics. But as long as one actually agree beforehand when there's a conflict, how I'm going to deal with that. So I think between now and the 18th, sort of when our actually our political government year really will start, 18th of July, that they work out a mechanism as to how they're going to deal with conflicts. You know, there's that totally is sorted out before, and also that they agree on the 5 or 6 big ticket policies. The rest they can disagree on. I mean, and obviously on the budget, I have to figure out how they're going to, how allocations are going to work, but and also how they're going to behave is going to be important. What is acceptable behavior that is expected from individual leaders and as individual in this cabinet? It's going to be very important to have the standards of behavior. How do you behave? What is behavior, and what will be accepted and not? I think if they can get over the line, if they can sort those things out, I think they'll have a good, you know, there's some very good possibilities.
William, sorry, one more thing for William, Quinn, and then I'll get to you. Tantanol Rupa is asking something that seemed very sensible. Should the GNU not have a conflict resolution mediator, a person perhaps such as yourself, an independent person called in to help negotiate these disputes that will arise?
Well, that's been my proposal to them, to actually have, you know, to have somebody independent. It could be, you know, it's, you know, someone not linked to any of the processes or any of the political parties. And so that may be to consider something like that. Could be even a retired judge that has the credibility also, you know, you know, who it is. I mean, that's not as important, but and a code of conduct of, you know, how do they conduct to link the two. And so that's going to be very important. Yeah.
Sorry, Queenin, what were you going to add there?
I just wanted to ask Prof if there's any possibility of him being some kind of advisor to the GNU.
I'm returning to teach. Oh, guys, it's been long. It's been a long session, but and so on. I mean, it's obviously open to many things, but it's been, I mean, you know, involvement in the MPC has been quite long, and I have been involved in this stretch also. In terms of helping, guiding, being a person that you can phone and both sides, because I did work on, I was co-chairing in February the government's proposals that sadly didn't go to Parliament, because it would have resolved all of our issues now on the coalition law, draft law, and how minority government would work, but it needed to go to Parliament to be adopted. But sadly, at the time, many ANC leaders thought it would get about 50%, and they will only introduce it into the new Parliament. If you know, so a lot of our problems could have been resolved if those proposals, which were accepted by cabinet, by the way, if they were taken through to Parliament and adopted before the elections. So open to, I mean, I'm standing open to give people advice, although I think I'm going to return back to teach at university.
Speaking of Parliament, Queenin, just a quick one. We're now in this kind of surreal situation where the official leader of the opposition in Parliament is the former judge, John Hlophe. What kind of an opposition role do you see MK and EFF playing? Will it be constructive? I mean, is there hope of that?
Yes, so I do see hope of that. Remember, Julius Malema did say that the EFF is changing its approach and becoming more mature, thank God. After 10 years, the EFF has realized that they need to change their approach. And I think it's mostly about how the electorate views them as an opposition party. Mostly saying that, you know, they're always ready to fight. They don't always use the right channels to show their discontent. So I do think that's a good move on their side. When it comes to the MK party, I mean, I've been so disappointed by them after elections, after garnering so much support. I don't think that the MK party has been effective in using that power that they've managed to get through the votes of the people. But it would be very interesting to see what's going to happen in the next couple of months. I think that the EFF and ATM particularly have had a certain stance around the ANC. The EFF stance being that they won't work with the DA or Freedom Fund Plus, and the ATM saying that, you know, they were at the forefront of holding the president accountable for Phala Phala, so they would not like the idea of working with the ANC because then it really goes against everything they stand for. The court cases that are pending, it just doesn't make sense politically for them at the moment. So two parties that have experience in parliament that could assist the MK party also learn how to become an effective opposition. I do think that whatever happens, if they do continue on the opposition benches, they have a huge opportunity to use this in their advantage. And it's up to them to decide how effective they'll be with being very mature in the process, using processes within Parliament. I think ATM was very good at that in their first term, using parliamentary processes to hold people accountable, making sure that they're visible as much as they are a small party. So I think that the GNU has its work cut out for itself because the EFF will leave no stone unturned. They are going to be on their case every chance they get. So I see it as a great opportunity, and I think that Julius Malema has realized the EFF's faults, and the MK party also wants to start showing its visibility. ATM wants to continue being relevant. So I think we should expect a very good opposition.
Okay, before I get to the last question for William, let me just address a piece of fake news. Musa is asking, please can someone explain how someone from Zimbabwe is the Minister of Home Affairs? Leon Schreiber is from Piketberg in the Northern Cape. William,
he is from the Northern Cape.
Yes. In conclusion, William, do you think we can honestly expect this GNU to go all the way? Do you see it lasting 5 years? And what will be the factors that play into that?
I think it's going to be important that to have something something they can deliver, which can catch the imagination of society. I mean, and like the something could be to provide to look after 10 to 15 million Black young people, give them something. I saw, I mean, in the UK now in this election, Rishi Sunak proposed a 1-year community service in the UK. Can we, I would suggest like one thing, like we need a big bang thing that can hold them together, that can run across. So if we could do something like that for between 10 and 15 million young people, who give them something and create an excitement in the same way. For example, in 1994, there was an excitement around the RDP. So they need something and so on. And I think this something must be related to young people. Secondly, what would make it work is that the GNU is not just the government, it's not just the state, but it's also the non-state. Can they bring in the private sector and civil society and professionals in ordinary South Africans? If they can get that, and if they can use the GNU to think differently as the state, that the state is also civil society in the delivery process, to bring civil society to help deliver business, to help deliver, and professionals. And I know ideologically, there's a lot of opposition at looking at that. I mean, I wrote a report for government in 2010 on how they should look at the state. That report was rejected and, in fact, shredded and so on, because it was an ideological opposition to looking at bringing in the private sector and civil society and communities to deliver services. So if the GNU can do that, I think they have a better chance of success.
It just remains to me now to thank our panelists, Professor William Gumede and Queenin Masuabi, politics reporter from the Daily Maverick. Always a pleasure. And thank you so much for giving us the benefit of your insights today. Clear that a lot is up in the air for the Government of National Unity. And to the members of the cabinet, perhaps we should remind them that to those to whom much is given, much is expected. Thank you all so much for tuning in, and we hope to see you again soon.